tragically, we lose air crew after air crew after air crew. And all of us are literally just one bullet away. We look at, some of the Marines who work for me, and they'd fly back, and you look at their aircraft, and just chunks of blades shot out, and engines shot out, and hydraulic systems, and unbelievably, those aircraft found a way back to their bases to get repaired and then put back in the fight.
I am a husband, a father, a lawyer, a Christian, and a proud Canadian. I started this series because it was clear that our nation needs truth. Not just another biased narrative, but real information of substance. We need access to facts and the freedom to think for ourselves. I'm Leighton Grey, and this is Grey Matter.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Grey Matter. Well, if you're like me, you're very focused on what is happening in geopolitical events. And of course, top of mind and really top of everyone's attention right now is the situation over in the Middle East. Well, today we have kind of a treat for you. We have someone who has spent a lot of time over there, actually in combat situations, as a member of the U.S. Marines, and he's written just a really fascinating, thrilling book about it. I just finished reading. It's called Ghosts of Baghdad: Marine Corps Gunships on the Opening Days of the Iraq War, and his name is Colonel Eric Buer. Thanks for being with us today on Grey Matter, Eric. It's so great to have you on the program.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the offer, and I'm really glad to be here today.
All right, we're going to talk about your book and also pick your brain about some of the things that are going on over there right now, which are strange to many people. And of course, it's never been more difficult to get reliable information. So we're going to appreciate your insight there. But before we dive into that, as we always do, we have some framing aphorisms to start our discussion. The first is from someone who's rather famous in the Marine Corps, and that's General Douglas MacArthur, who once said that duty, honor, country, those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be. Next, someone who was a well-known political figure during the Iraq War that you've written about, and that's Colin Powell, the late Colin Powell, who wrote that there are no secrets to success. It is the result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure. Next, somebody who's you actually quote in your book, and this is General James Mad Dog Mattis. He said, there are hunters and there are victims. By your discipline, cunning, obedience, and alertness, you will decide if you are a hunter or a victim. And finally, from the late General Norman Schwarzkopf, who was part of an Iraq War, and who wrote that true courage is being afraid and going ahead and doing your job anyhow. That is what courage is. Who do we have on the show today? Well, we've said it's Colonel Eric Buer. He's a retired U.S. Marine Corps, and he's written this book that we've described, The Ghosts of Baghdad. And he's currently a senior executive for an aviation and training company. He's also a consultant and public speaker in the areas of military and commercial aviation and global conflict. We're going to be talking with him about this today. He's a native Californian, but he spent his formative years in rural New England before graduating from Ohio Wesleyan University with a degree in economics. Strange training for a helicopter pilot. But after receiving a commission from the Marine Corps, he was trained to fly attack helicopters. And this is in large degree what his book is about. And so his deployments took him to the Persian Gulf, Somalia, Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He later served on the staff of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs as a professor of national security strategy and policy at the National War College and as an air group commanding officer. Not to embarrass him, he's also received some very distinguished awards, including the Distinguished Flying Cross, awarded for actions during the Global War on Terror. And he's received a number of very high-level citations, military citations, for his time in the Marine Corps. So why don't we start off with this, Eric or Colonel? How does somebody with a degree in economics end up flying helicopters in the Marines?
Yes, great question. I think, as a college student at the ripe old age of 18 or 19, I was really looking for my next adventure. And so I ran into one of those silver-tongued devils called Marine recruiters. And and they have a way of, really talking to you, kind of understanding who you are, what you want to do. And next thing I found myself with my foots on the yellow footprints with my feet there in Quantico and at Officer Candidate School. And it was the right fit for me. It was the right sense of camaraderie, teamwork, um, and they gave me an opportunity to fly, something I always wanted to do. So the Marine
Hmm.
Corps at the time was the perfect fit for me. I didn't think it would be as long a journey as it was, but that's how I got there. And they looked past that degree in economics. I know they wanted engineers, and somehow I passed the test, so it worked out.
Obviously, a tremendously proud history in the U.S. Marines. A whole history of accomplishments and various conflicts going back really over 100 years. Um, what I'm interested in, maybe before we get into your book, is as a college student who went to the U.S. Marines, and for those of us who've seen movies like Full Metal Jacket, what was that like? The exposure, the initial exposure, going into basic training as a Marine. What sorts of things did you learn there about yourself and about what it means to be a U.S. Marine?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. First and foremost, you're not, no matter who you are, you're not as good as you think you are, right? And so you're immediately surrounded by high level, high performing people. And my first exposure was getting off a bus in the middle of nowhere in Quantico, Virginia, and you see a Marine gunnery sergeant walking towards you, and he doesn't look like he's, wants to know if you need some help with anything, or he wants to know how your day is going. He's about to he's about to indoctrinate you into a new way of life that you could never possibly imagine, and for all the right reasons, instilling a strict sense of purpose and duty and discipline. So it was a shocking change as I rolled off the bus with kind of long hair, at a track season in college, and just looking for, maybe there should be some classes during the day. you know. So yeah, it was a whole new world.
Part of that training, as I understand it, and of course this is not unique to the Marines, but probably the Marines is an extreme example. Is to some degree it's necessary to strip away some of the undesirable parts of your personality and to sort of ingrain in you certain principles and qualities. And correct me if this is wrong, but my understanding from reading about this experience is that in order to train young people like yourselves to be able to deal with these life threatening, incredibly dangerous situations, in order to be able to handle that fear, what the Marines are taught is not to rely upon themselves, but to rely upon their basically their buddies, the person next to them, that to put their trust in that person next to them, that person is going to be there, and that you're part of a core and a part of a group. Is that a correct way of looking at it, or does it go deeper than that?
No, I think you said that. It's pretty accurate. Um, if there's a sense of service, there's a sense of, like I said, camaraderie and teamwork. You certainly don't want to let anyone down. The fear of failure outweighs, any need to achieve in those situations. You are there. In my case, you're there to lead. And so when I go to officer candidate school, it is a massive screening process. They want to get rid of as many people as they possibly can for all the right reasons. And so it leaves you with this sense of service, this kind of immense responsibility, even as a young lieutenant. Um, understanding that you're going to have to be in a position to give Marines, the best training, the best, make sure they're the best equipped and taken care of, and eventually you're going to have to lead them into combat at some stage of your career, whether it's as a second lieutenant or as a general officer. So it's an immense responsibility, and I think early on you get a sense of that responsibility, and it never goes away in a very positive way.
Hmm. It's sort of an ultimate meritocracy, isn't it? where it really is a system that's designed to bring out the best in young people and also to produce the best and the brightest into those leadership positions. That's really how the U.S. Marine Corps is set up. Is that right?
It is. It's the way I believe every organization should be set up. It's the Marine Corps is a faceless, colorless organization. I believe it is. Some don't, and that's fine. But it is very much a meritocracy. If you look at some of the senior leaders today in the Marine Corps, you'll find a wide swath of the country, a wide swath of the world. Quite frankly, we have a lot of folks that come across the world in a desire to become Marines and U.S. citizens and serve not just themselves, but serve a Marine Corps in a new nation in some cases. But it is a meritocracy, and I believe the Marine Corps has it right in so many ways of ensuring our best have an opportunity to serve at the highest levels.
So, as I mentioned off the top, I had the pleasure of reading your book, and actually, I experienced it as the audio version. And as much as I'm sure the text version is great, the audio version was kind of a thrill ride experience. And I had the impression that you wrote it to a large degree in that way to give people a sort of a firsthand experience of what it is like to ride in one of these incredible machines under very, very dangerous circumstances. But what was it like for you, getting into flying helicopters and really being in one of these incredible machines for the very first time? Well, what was that experience like?
So I remember my first. I mean, I certainly remember my first flight in the Cobra, and I remember my instructor, very patient Marine captain at the time. But it was exciting. It's this continuous sense of newness, this continuous challenges that come to you, and in this type of platform, you never arrive. You're never at a place where certainly never. You don't know everything. You don't know how every situation is going to unfold in front of you, or what the aircraft is going to do or not do for you. It's relatively simple, the aircraft itself, but the mission sets are very complex. The weapon
Right.
systems are very complex. The sensors on board are very complex, and then integrating yourself with your wingman or more than one or two wingmen, the ground units, higher headquarters. That's really the art of it. The science is the flying and understanding the very details of the weapon systems, but the art of that is building a team and building a team that is prepared to go out and execute, and oftentimes execute without orders, just with intent, the intent of the ground commander or the intent of your higher headquarters saying, hey, this is what we're looking at doing over these next hours or days. And then as a leader, you go out and you execute to your best, just on those kind of mission orders, vice very detailed things they expect you to do.
Right. So you flew these helicopters in 2003 during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Um, and but I maybe just for people who are not familiar with it, could you just describe the incredible power and capacity of these machines, of these helicopters, in terms of how fast they fly, how maneuverable they are, and how heavily equipped they are in terms of munitions and payload?
Yes. So in my case, I was flying a Bell, a Super Cobra, and it's about 15,000 pounds of magic. Really, it is. It's engines and wires and blades and aerodynamics that an econ grad doesn't always grasp. Um, and also in there, you've got missiles. In our case, laser guided Hellfire missiles. We still had some TOW, which are wire guided missiles. Uh, Rockets, unguided rockets, carry close to 40 of those. Carry up to 750 rounds of 20 millimeter cannon that's stored inside the helicopter. So you have a tremendous amount of firepower. Um, but that never replaces the two brains in there. You've got two pilots, usually the more senior pilots in the back seat. In my case, I was in the back seat, and you got a young first tour pilot in your front seat, and you those two brains together are certainly better than one. And you build that teamwork, that kind of sense of purpose, and then you share that with your wingman, who has the same capabilities as you do for the most part. And so it's a very much a building block. You learn the machines, you learn the capabilities of the machines, you meld as a crew, you meld as a flight, and then you meld as a bigger organization, and you're much better prepared to execute, yeah, whatever they throw at you.
One of the, I believe it's in the opening chapter of the book. There's a scene in which things start to go wrong. Where, and I know you'll recall this, and perhaps you could elaborate on this. But it's essentially what happens is you're out flying and you realize that there are other aircraft out there, and it's at some point you discover that they're actually friendly. That they're actually friendlies. That there are other helicopters that are flying back to base. You're heading into combat, but you're very close together. You can't really see each other, and there's this incredible concern that you're actually going to have a mid-air crash. You want to talk about that experience? Because I could actually feel myself being in that helicopter, thinking, "Oh my goodness, this could all go horribly wrong." And that's kind of the sense that one has from experiencing your book. It's like being in this helicopter and being in that sort of dangerous situation. Could you describe that, and also maybe explain if that was the way that you decided to write the book, and if so, why you chose to sort of have that type of narrative?
Yeah, so I chose to write the book that way because it was the I found it was a story number one that needed to be told. And as you listen to the story, and it's not my story, it's our collective story, and that was how I wanted to write the book. Number one, and I wanted, whether it was you, whether it was you had neighbors or people had sons and daughters and nephews and nieces who served, or fathers, I wanted them to understand that I you have to see the story through my lens. The story is told through me, but it represents so many of us that served, in particular in these first 27 days as we kicked off the war in Iraq. So I wanted the reader to get a sense of ownership early on, to have a sense of what we were thinking, how we were thinking, and then let them step into the cockpit, let them close the door, let them hear what I hear, see what I see, and give them an opportunity that really rarely comes along, and see what we demanded of these great Americans. And I serve alongside them, and they're amazing people. The opening night was particularly chaotic. It was the opening night, after all. I was not new to this. I'd been in the Marine Corps. I was a pretty senior major at the time. I'd had thousands of hours. I was a weapons school graduate in the Marine Corps' kind of version of Top Gun, for lack of a better term. And I felt incredibly well prepared. Um, and that lasted about 5 minutes. And we took off. We took off. There was no moon. It was planned that way, so there was no moon. We took off before the sun had set, so our night vision devices weren't working. It was an epic sandstorm we flew into, and we launched as a flight of eight, four Cobras. We had a command and control aircraft flying, just running up and down the border. We had three transport helicopters putting in Marine Corps force reconnaissance units at the time, and still some of the best trained Marines we have, period. And their objective was to get on the top of Safwan Hill, which is the biggest or tallest piece of geography in the south of Iraq, to get eyes on the Iraqis, to make sure they couldn't fire artillery or find other ways to clog those Marine units, ground units, pushing across the border early that next morning. And so the chaos was real. The fears were absolutely real. I lost situational awareness multiple times. And by the time we get on the target, we're looking for enemy, and then the enemy finds us. And we're literally just hanging on by a thread, trying to make the best decisions we can. And I'm, of course, plagued by making a series of bad decisions. And thank God I had my young co-pilot in the front seat, keeping me squared away. That's just what they do. It's a team sport. And I had a wingman, incredibly patient, smart, as smart as they get, that crew, keeping us alive collectively. And so many lessons learned after the first night. But what struck me, and I think it'll strike the readers, is that we landed. You don't know you have confidence till you lose it. Any athlete will know that. Anyone who's participated, you don't. And we landed, I think, to a man, and we never discussed it at the time. In the back of all of our minds, we're like, we're never going to be able to go out and do this again. We won't survive another night. It's just a fact. And so we went out the next night. We flew for almost 13 hours. And every day, you just try to get a little bit better. You just try to get a little bit sharper.
Mm-hmm.
And the senior guy? Absolutely. Was it a complete democracy? Absolutely. Everyone got a vote. Anything I did that was stupid, they told me, and I charged them to. You had to, and as you read, and as the story goes on, and as we fight a more sophisticated enemy, it just gets more and more and more challenging. And you just every day you just got to find a way to get better.
The in the book, and of course you call it the ghosts of Baghdad, and one of the very fascinating and I would say brilliant things that you do in the book is there's another character in the book all the time that is ever present, and it's this sense of danger. And when you're describing when you're up in the air and you're flying, there's always this sense out there of something terrible that could happen, and that was palpable in the book. That even though you're flying this incredible machine and you're surrounded by highly competent people whom you trust, and you're supported by this whole incredible group of people that make up the U.S. Marines, and all the tactical expertise and knowledge, and the sum of that, there's this unknown force that's out there all the time. Is that sort of what you meant by the ghosts of Baghdad? Is that part of it, or did I have that wrong?
No, I think you're right, and I think without spoiling it, for lack of a better term, it is. There's so much uncertainty out there. You know, you I may be surrounded by wingmen. I may be surrounded by a flight of four aircraft, and you feel tremendously alone, tremendously vulnerable, because you know there's more than just the weather or the Iraqis or there's so much unchance. There's so much chance and uncertainty that can come and snatch you at any given time. And as you saw throughout the book, it does. Tragically, we lose aircrew after aircrew after aircrew.
Right.
Um, and all of us are literally just one bullet away. We look at, some of the Marines who work for me, and they'd fly back, and you look at their aircraft, and just chunks of blades shot out, and engines shot out, and hydraulic systems, unbelievably, those aircraft found a way back to their bases to get repaired and then put back in the fight. So the Ghost is a lot of things to me. I believe I'll back it up a little bit. When I did the research for this book, very selfishly, I got to spend hundreds of hours with old friends, and that was just so rewarding for me. Um,
Hmm.
my co-pilot, my wingman, my squadron commander, my air group commander, friends of mine who were on the ground that went on to serve, you know, multiple tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan. But in those times, I had a chance for some one-on-one just to kind of peel back things, just kind of peel back the thoughts, the emotions that they really hadn't thought about for a long time. And very selfishly for me, they to a person had the same feelings. But nothing scars deeper than a good case of horror, right? There's nothing that just shocks you, thinking there's no way we're going to find a way out of these situations. And then you find whether they're flying with you or next to you or they're on the ground that they had that same sense of dread at times. And so, again, selfishly, I felt really privileged to talk to them about it. And so, the ghost it means different things to different people, and it's a bit ill defined, and it's purposefully ill defined. But I found it represented, kind of where I was at that time and how I perceived the world. And I'd seen her before, as I talked about, whether it was on the streets of Mogadishu or in the mountains of Bosnia. I knew there was more than just an enemy in the environment trying to get me. It's out there, it, and
Right.
if you don't, you've got to be aware of it because if not, it will get you. It's just
Yeah, it's almost a palpable sense of almost good and evil,
yeah.
of being in an existential crisis at all times, a real one, that's life or death. One of the other characters in the book, and maybe that's the wrong term for it, but you do a tremendous job of bringing this to life, is the terrain itself, the experience of being in a part of the world that I think to many North Americans would seem extremely inhospitable. And on your website, actually, there's a map of the area where you were in combat and you were flying. But the terrain and the experience of being in this environment is very much a part of the book too, isn't it?
It is. We'd wake up, after flying all night, we'd wake up in the morning after sleeping several hours, and we get our next set of missions. And I may be off. I think Iraq is about 177,000 square miles. It's the size of New England plus New York, Pennsylvania. It is a massive amount of land to
Right.
quote have eyes on at any given time. In the south, it's punctuated by deserts. A lot of that was the kind of the water politics of Saddam Hussein to kind of starve out and take the water away from the Shia in the south. And as you worked your way to the north, you could feel the coolness. You get out at night and you'd breathe in and you'd suck in some humidity and you could almost smell the green as you worked your way into the central areas of Iraq into Baghdad. And as you worked your way north, you could begin to see mountains. And and they all presented their own unique challenges, but the terrain itself was very much alive and living. Not just because flying across a desert on a moonless night is one of the most dangerous things you can do. There's no horizon. You can easily fly yourself into the ground, or fly yourself into your wingman, or your wingman into you, or to buildings,
Right.
or to
Yeah.
towers, and there's so many other things out there that are of concern to you that are not always there when you're planning a mission. But the terrain, the environment for me, it came alive.
Those of us who are old enough to have lived through that period recall it vividly, and my sense is that there was a very strong sense that those of you who were fighting over there were on the right side of the case. You are on the right side of history. That this Saddam Hussein was an evil man, an evil dictator who was abusing his own people horribly, who was a danger, a geopolitical danger to that part of the world and really to the world generally. And that you were over there to do a very important job, and that was to protect us. Did you have an abiding sense of that while you were over there and throughout the time you were there? Because that certainly comes through in the book. I don't sense in reading your book really any sort of questioning of, oh well, are we doing the right thing? Do we belong here? Are there really weapons of mass destruction? My sense of reading the book or listening to the book was that you were there to do a job, and you really had a strong sense that you were there on the right side of history. Is that a correct way of the way you saw things, or did you find while you were over there that you were maybe questioning the political reasons behind why you were there?
No, I didn't. I think as time goes on, everyone believes they have these deep insights of reflection, that they understand the geopolitical world as they knew it, and they love to tell you, "I told you so." You got to remember, 18 months prior was 9/11. Yeah, the country was at
Right.
war. We were on a war footing. Very much now, what it looks like now in certain places of the world, we are absolutely on the right side of history. Anyone who doesn't think Saddam was an absolute brutal dictator, um, just look at some of the films as the Ba'ath Party took over. Look at
Yeah.
some of the mass executions, very Stalin-esque. Secret police. His cousin Chemical Ali, who would end up defending in Basra, which I talk about in the book. He's gassing Kurds, he's gassing Iranians. Don't think for a minute. Don't look through this some type of rose-colored glasses that they were anything, or he was anything but a tyrant. It is insanity to think otherwise. We are absolutely on the right side of history, and I would go back and do two more tours in Iraq in particular. Now, how it was handled politically, those are what books are being written about,
Yeah.
and those are what people are discussing now. But in 2003, like I said, the towers were still down, the Pentagon was still in shambles, and a field in Pennsylvania was still littered with bodies of great Americans. And so, to think that we would even question that now is, for me, is quintessentially un-American, and it's just tremendously disloyal to all those we called to serve. And I hope people realize that.
Yeah, one of the things that people don't realize either, and I read a piece um, recently by Ben Shapiro, and I want to get your take on this. and he said that we have a tendency in the West to presume wrongly that everyone else in the world sees the world the way we do. And in Mr. Shapiro's piece, he says, people in that part of the world, in places like Palestine or Iraq or elsewhere, they don't see things the way we do. They have a very different view of life and death, place different values on human life. The type of people who will actually have children and train them to be human explosive devices. These are things that are considered by those of us in the West, hopefully nearly all of us or all of us, as being morally abhorrent, but is commonplace in terms of the mindset. I got the sense from your book that this was one of the difficult things about being over there and being in that type of a conflict is, yes, you're there to do a job and you're trained to kill, but also in dealing with the enemy, with the Iraqi people, having understanding that their view of life is very, very different than our own and what we're raised to think about in North America. Would you agree with Mr. Shapiro in that regard, or what was your sense of, in your contact with the people who were over there whom you were fighting?
So I had very little contact. All those tours, not all those, but my three tours there, you have very little interaction. My friends who are ground commanders, they would certainly have interaction with, local leaders, religious leaders, community leaders, through their interpreters. They would have a lot more insight to it. But fundamentally, from my feedback from them was that it's humanity, it's people. I think there's
Right.
some common themes and threads that they want to raise their families, and they like to think their sons and daughters are going to have a brighter future than they did. Uh, in no way would they support tyranny or repression. They don't. No one wants to live under the gun or the threat of violence daily. Um, it makes it difficult, and in some of those extreme environments, it's difficult to break that cycle. When they tell you women aren't going to go to school, or they're certainly not going to go to college, and girls aren't going to go to school, they mean it. It's
Right.
it's very, very autocratic. It's very dangerous, and so modernity has barely touched those countries. And as soon as
Mm.
it is, and we just have to look across the Arab and Muslim world to see when the Arab Spring came, and to see in many cases the reactions of those governments, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Iraq, or whether it's in Iran, and how they go to suppress those ideas. I don't want to go to toe with Mr. Shapiro in a debate. He is quite an intellectual, and so I would agree on the fundamentals that we can't expect the world to think the way we think, but I think the world still brings some fundamentals that we would all agree on,
Right.
as humans, and the understanding of family and community.
In addition to serving in Iraq, you also served in Afghanistan. I'm interested to get your take on, how the American forces left Afghanistan. This has been a source of tremendous, criticism in terms of the Biden administration, and really leaving that country in the hands of the Taliban. That must have been difficult for someone with your military background to watch unfold.
It was, and I think my feeling of disappointment and really of disgust is not uncommon. I think it's probably the singular most common reaction that any veteran had. The way we left it, how we left it, was just we all should be embarrassed. We
Hmm.
had people. We spent 20 years telling the people of that country that we're here to stay and we care. We're not going anywhere. We'll defeat the Taliban. We'll put you in a place to be where you want to be as a nation, to raise your family, the things we just talked about, and then to literally scurry away under the cover of darkness, as an analogy, is disgraceful. And there's no one to blame except our most senior leaders who allow that to happen. And there's so many other ways. Even at the time, there were so many other voices of reason on, if we're going to do this, this is how we can do it. Vice backroom deals with the Taliban on trying to get things out of that country that really are of no value to us. The things that were valued to us were the people, the human capital, the people that trusted us and believed in us, that we simply left behind to fall into the hands of the exact people we said we would never let them fall into.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a tragedy.
That situation in Afghanistan and the way that it was handled by the American leaders seems to have been kind of a focal point for the beginnings of instability in that region, coupled with, let's say, a return to the Barack Obama friendly policy towards Iran. Those seems to have been key situations or key contributors to the instability that we're seeing in that region right now. And I want to get your take on what's going on, obviously, over in Gaza right now. Of course, this is a terrible situation in which many people are dying and being killed. Um, but there's so much debate about this, about who's right and who's wrong in the moment. For example, Ilhan Omar, who's an American politician, made a statement about this Gaza hospital blast in the middle of the conflict, and of course, many people have gotten this wrong, including the Canadian Prime Minister, who incidentally gets nearly everything wrong. But what are your what are your thoughts about what's going on in Gaza right now?
It is a humanitarian disaster that is absolutely undeniable. Um, it falls directly, the blame falls directly on Hamas, and that means it falls directly on the Iranians. The Iranians clearly have given long-lasting support to Hamas in the south, certainly have given support to Hezbollah in the north, throughout all of Lebanon, and factions that, of course, support the West Bank. Hamas doesn't care about the Palestinian people. They have no concern for them. They're human shields. Uh, they're a punchline for kind of their messaging. If they did care, they would have stocked water. They would have stocked foods and fuel and energy, and they would have, worked a deal earlier on through either the Qataris or the Saudis or directly to the Egyptians to get people out, to get civilians who want out through the South Gate. They had no plans for that. Their plans were, they were emboldened by a lack of action by the U.S. administration, clearly as seen in Afghanistan, clearly as seen throughout most of the Middle East right now. Clearly, it was seen when we deal with even the Russians or the Chinese, a sense of weakness. It doesn't mean we have to, have airstrikes every time something goes south. It means you have to have a coherent and cohesive plan, and you have to stick to it. And you have to realize
Right,
that they only understand force often, and so we don't have to be a bully. We just have to understand we won't be bullied. And
right,
so, very, very difficult to watch. Um, I think on a very positive side from the Israelis, the level of transparency, their interactions with the media, the global media, when the hospital quote bombing, artillery strike or airstrike happened, it was immediately, being able to be disproved by the Israelis because they have real time, they have real time targeting and real time reconnaissance of pretty much the entirety of the Gaza Strip, and you could see that those are Islamic Jihad attempting to fire rockets and misfiring rockets into their own positions and killing their own people. So I think on a very positive note, oftentimes the media can spin things. I think as time goes on, uh, with media coverage there being what I see as being very transparent for the most part, and the Israelis being very transparent, I think the world's going to see that they're doing what they have an absolute right to do, defend themselves the way they have since 1948, in every incursion that's been designed to literally, to their sworn enemies who say they're going to wipe them off the face of the earth.
right.
Whether we believe that or not, if I was an Israeli, I would have to take that threat incredibly seriously, considering what they have just done to us.
Hmm. One other brilliant American commentators who is not a military man, but I'm interested to get your take on this, is Dr. Thomas Sowell of Stanford and Hoover, the Hoover Foundation, and he said something very interesting about the UN and its role, and perhaps doing harm in terms of protracting and in some cases creating an environment where these types of attacks by Hamas are let's say less risky than they would be. He used the example of, for example, going back to when Carthage attacked Rome, and they risked ultimate destruction, and they ultimately suffered destruction. The same is true of the Nazis in 1939 when they waged war on the rest of the world. That ultimately, in 1945, Germany was left in ruins. Well, today, because of the UN's sort of meddling in things and imposing pressure to create ceasefires and things like that, what Sol says is he says it creates an environment in which groups like Hamas will risk attacking a much more powerful foe, in this case Israel, because they'll have confidence they can go in and parachute in and murder people, massacre people at a music festival, and that in the aftermath they won't risk ultimate destruction the way Carthage, the way Germany did, because the UN will come in and call for ceasefires. Um, and it seems to me what Sol says, and I'm interested to get your take on this, that the ultimate solution to this is to permit Israel to wage war. They've been attacked, and to wage war, not to stay their hand or fetter them, because that is going to produce the ultimate long-term solution to the problem. Would you agree with that, or do you think that's being too severe?
Well, and there is like I said, there is a serious humanitarian crisis, and the Palestinian people, the people of Palestine, and the people that are currently inside of inside of Gaza, they need an opportunity. I know it's difficult. I can't even imagine the level of suffering they're under right now and pressure they're under, but they have to be given an opportunity to leave. They have to be given a free road out, and I don't know that's going to happen. Right? I don't think Hamas wants the population base to leave. I mean, they wouldn't. That's not who they are. They're too cowardly, right? They don't want to stand and fight. They want to hide behind what they consider their brothers and sisters. Um, the UN is a very difficult organization sometimes. My experience with them directly under the United Nations Task Force in Somalia, oftentimes we didn't know really what they stood for and who they stood for. It was very murky at times, and so often there would be convoys that were being taken by these same people that we were attempting to deter from doing any harm. Um, so the UN, particularly in dealing with Hamas, is in a very difficult situation. They always have been a difficult situation. I don't think we should be funding that. I don't think we should be funding Hamas to find new ways to conduct warfare against their not their allies clearly, but against the Israelis. Um, it's a funding stream that we have to find ways to get hold of, whether it's through the UN. The Qataris fund hundreds of millions of dollars to the Palestinians for all the right reasons. There's really no way to check those dollars, where those dollars are being spent, how they're being spent, where that influence is being put. For me, it comes back to the Iranians. It is
Mhm.
fundamentally the Iranians. Um, if we can peel away the UN, we can peel away, in this case, sometimes the Qataris or the Saudis out of this. It becomes Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Iranians, all paper tigers. Um, and that's where I see the Israelis having the most bang for their buck. Target Hamas. If they have to target Hezbollah, they have to target Hezbollah because Hezbollah, within days, which we predicted, were firing rounds into the north of Israel. And it's the Iranians, and the
Mhm.
Iranians are the ones who provide. Iranians provide the training. The Iranians provide the funding, and the Iranians somehow have had this aura about them, like they are somehow this local hegemon or superpower. I mean, they're flying aircraft from the 70s and 80s. They don't have a relevant anything. They don't have a relevant
Right.
navy. They don't have a relevant air force. They don't have a relevant ground force. Um, and so they are very much on thin ice. All of them are. Um, I Israel absolutely has the right to push back. Absolutely has the right to wage war to defend themselves. And I think if they do, and if it's done in the right way, all three of those will be exposed.
And speaking of funding, I noticed a piece that the Biden administration was slammed by many Republicans after announcing $100 million in aid for Gaza and the West Bank. Would you agree with those commentators that providing that type of financial aid to Gaza and the West Bank is really perpetuating the problem and is really let's say throwing gasoline on a burning fire?
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know. I don't know how we can fund. How do you fund your most critical ally in the Arab world, which is the Israelis, and simultaneously push funding, no matter how well you think you're going to be able to have some sort of checks and balances on that to the Palestinians? It doesn't work. It's a mixed message. I don't know if it's appeasement to some radicals we have across the U.S. that seem to get a lot of play in the press and play on the media. Um, I don't know how you can possibly do both. I think right now the focus should be on the Israelis, a long-term and key and critical ally in the Middle East, and the rest of those folks that have decided to wage war should turn to their allies. They should turn to their Muslim and Arab neighbors and brothers and sisters, and they should put their tin cup out and they should ask for funding. It shouldn't be American taxpayers doing that.
That's a very interesting take. And the other thing that is, I guess, a corollary to that is there's a call for Gazans refugees to be permitted into Europe and into North America. It seems rather strange to fly them all over the world when their Arab neighbors could very easily take them in, and of course, culturally, it would seem that would be a much better fit for those people as refugees. Why is it that these Arab nations don't want to help? I don't seem to want to help in terms of providing refugee status to these people, or to provide them with humanitarian funding.
It's a great question. It's a great question that I certainly can't answer, but their neighbors should be able to answer.
Hmm.
Uh, they're you know, very close proximity or what should be both African and Middle Eastern allies that should be willing to accept refugees. Flying them across the globe to further traumatize Palestinians to assimilate into America, I don't know there's a value add to that uh, when we're fighting our own border crises currently in this country.
Right.
I think it shouldn't always be an American problem. We are certainly empathetic, but it should be a regional problem. It should be, if we have issues in North America, we turn to North American problems first. We'd like to believe, not because
Yeah.
we don't care. It's just that they're in a region where they have very much sympathetic allies, and they should turn to those allies for support, uh, financial support, uh, immigration support. It should be an open door for them.
It becomes a lot more difficult to be empathetic, though, when you have pro-Palestinian demonstrators swarming Capitol Hill and demanding a Gazan ceasefire, and where police have to arrest protesters. It seems to me a lot has been made in the United States about the January 6th, but what just happened recently is at least as bad or worse. What's your take on that part of the picture?
Uh, I think it goes to what we have. It occurs no place else in the world is the fluidity of our borders.
Yeah.
We don't particularly screen people well. It just doesn't happen. The idea of political asylum has been a golden ticket. And if we think that the vast majority of those people have come to the country to assimilate, to accept American values, to try to live an American dream, we are fooling ourselves.
Mhm.
We have enclaves across the world that we know are terror based, and we have enclaves now that are across this country. People have assimilated this country that are terror based or have significant sympathies to terrorist organizations. And
Mhm.
so there may be some romanticized teenagers who think, oh, they're just the poor Palestinians that are supported by this Hamas. It's a veneer of understanding of generational struggles and generational challenges, and it's not as simply as saying we'll put more money at it and let's bring those people to the U.S. and they'll someday see it our way. It's ridiculous, actually.
Mhm. It's and it's not a problem that's unique to the United States. So we've had very large rallies like this in Canada and in cities like Toronto, Montreal, Edmonton, and elsewhere. That's happening in Europe. Large rallies in places like London and in France. And so it really has become sort of a global problem. So that's not just confined to Israel and the West Bank, and so it certainly is a rising geopolitical issue that those of us in the West are going to have to face. So we're coming to the part of the show where we want to wrap up and turn to something called that we call the reading list. Of course, your book today is featured. It's called, as we said, Ghosts of Baghdad, Marine Corps Gunships on the Opening Days of the Iraq War. And the description here is climb in the cockpit and join a Marine attack helicopter pilot in this authentic and compelling first-hand account of the opening days and nights of the Iraq War. I can tell you from listening to this book, that's exactly what you get. It is a thrilling ride. It's you get to experience the sights and smells and sounds of the Cobra helicopter hanging on tight as you're hurled into the chaos of night combat operations. Step through an otherwise closed door and explore the emotions, physical danger, and successes that would shape a generation of aviators. And in addition to that, you also get a sense, as you heard from our guest, of the camaraderie, the closeness of what it means to be a Marine, and how their training binds them together, and really makes it possible for them to deal with these life-threatening, harrowing situations that really even their best training could not prepare them for. But the camaraderie and the solidarity that you get a sense of in this book, that as I said, is very palpable, is something that I think people will really appreciate, especially in modern times where we seem to be so divided. The other book that I'm going to mention before I turn it over to our guest is one that I had read years ago and looked at again, and our guest might be familiar with this one. This book is called Low Level Hell. This is a scout pilot in the Big Red One. This is a book that is about Aero Scouts of the 1st Infantry Division that had 3 words emblazoned on their unit patch: low level hell. It was then and continues today as the perfect, concise definition of what these intrepid aviators experienced as they ranged the skies of Vietnam from the Cambodian border to the Iron Triangle. The outcasts, as they were known, flew low and slow, aerial eyes of the division in search of the enemy, and too often, for longevity's sake, they found the Viet Cong and the fight was on. And these were very young pilots, just like our guest, 19 to 22 years old. And they sort of invented this book as they went along. And when I experienced your book, Eric, I was kind of reminded of this book that I'd read a number of years ago when I was in university, and I had taken a military history course and been studying Vietnam. I don't know if you've read that book, but I thought it was an interesting sort of companion one to the one that you wrote. So turning it over to
Yeah.
you, I wonder if you have some ideas about a book that influenced you, or that you think would be useful to our viewers and listeners, to help them gain a better insight into what it was like for you to be over there fighting in the Cobra helicopter in Iraq, or just the books that influenced you, that you grew up with in your education, or a website or some other resource that perhaps could help people gain a better understanding of the Middle East and the conflict over there.
Yeah, so number one, Hugh Mills, a tremendous, I call him a mentor now to me. He wrote Low Level Hell, and I talked to him at length, very generous with his time, one of the most decorated aviators in U.S. history, humble gentleman, and I'm glad you brought up Low Level Hell, unbelievable book, and had a big impact on me as a young officer.
Really,
I,
that's
oh,
fascinating.
very much so, yeah. There's another book written by Alan Mack. He's a retired Army officer, Chief Warrant Officer 5, a special operations pilot. His book's called Razor Zero 03, and it talks about bringing the first U.S. forces into Afghanistan after 9/11. And so those ODAs, the U.S. Special Forces ODAs that went into Afghanistan, the horseback riders, the horse soldiers, He was the one who flew those in. Great book. Another gentleman, always a pleasure to talk to. It's called Razor 03. And two books I've just reread for context, and they're kind of timeless for me. The first was Dereliction of Duty, written by H.R. McMaster. When he was getting his graduate degree, he wrote this book. H.R. retired. It's a 3-star. He became the National Security Advisor briefly for an administration, but great insights on the political side of the war in Vietnam. And I took so many of these insights uh, again with me after having served in Afghanistan or seen how we ran things in Afghanistan. So many very dangerous parallels with that. And the last book I've recently read is We Were Soldiers by Hal Galloway, and
Yes, I've read
which
this
is
one. Yeah.
unbelievable. And I had a chance to meet Joe Galloway and Hal Moore, Lieutenant General Hal Moore, retired, and I had a chance when I was at the Command and Staff College to meet them both. I have a signed copy of the book, and I reread that again recently, just to rethink through small unit level leadership, to look at the aviation, how aviation played a role in their Army aviation in particular, um, and then just the sheer leadership by at the time Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore. It's a great read. I think it's a timeless read, and so those are some books I'd recommend. Really, kind of whetting your appetite for understanding somewhat the nature of war, and then things very much at the tactical level that are very interesting and still very much relevant.
Well, thank you very much for those selections, and also for taking this time to be with us here today on Gray Matter. I know it's been a very illuminating discussion. The book, for those who are interested, I strongly recommend it. It's called Ghosts of Baghdad: Marine Corps Gunships on the Opening Days of the Iraq War. It's available in hardcover and anywhere you buy books, including Amazon. I listened to it as an audiobook, which I highly recommend. The narration is just wonderful, and I really got as I said, a palpable sense of what it was like to be flying around in these helicopters. Also, very worthwhile to check out Colonel Buer's own website, where he has a lot of information there. Some of the recent pieces that he's written, and some really great pictures of his experiences as well of his corps when he was over there. So if you've been fascinated by today's discussion, and I'm sure that you have been, please check out his book and also his website. Is there any other place where people can find more out about you and your work, Eric?
I think ericbuer.com is the website. Will have information on there. If you Google me, things will pop up, and certainly you would want to find the book. Like you said, it's Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any place you want to buy or listen to or read books, you'll find them there. Reach out to me. Anyone has any questions, reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to answer what anyone would think would even be a mundane question. I'm happy to either answer it or point them in the right direction to someone who can.
Well, thank you very much, Colonel. It's been our pleasure talking with you. Thanks for spending this hour with us. Really enjoyed your book. I hope you write another one. And if you do, I hope you'll come back and talk to us about it. Thanks for being our special guest here today on Gray Matter.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.